Okay, good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Um, Tonight we're going to talk about this week's Torah portion. It's a double Torah portion, Behar and Bechukosai. One of the themes of this week's Torah portion is the laws of Shemitah, the laws of the seventh year, as well as the laws of Yovel of the 50th year, when everything changes. So in the seventh year, all the land goes back to its original owners. And in the 50th year, an even bigger way, all the land goes back to its original owners, and all slaves go free, etc. It's actually what's inscribed on the Liberty Bell is from this week's Torah portion. You shall declare freedom throughout the land. That is from this week's Torah portion. So we see here that the mitzvah of Shemitah, the mitzvah of keeping the seventh year holy, and we don't plant and eat the food of the seventh year, is specific to the land of Israel, right? The counting of the years didn't start until the Jewish people entered the land. And in a more general sense, we see that there are many mitzvahs that are like this that really don't apply until the Jewish people came into the land of Israel. So we're going to go through some of these mitzvahs and talk about what this means. So obviously, like we mentioned, the first one is the laws of Shemitah and Yovel of the seventh year sabbatical year, as well as the Yovel is after 7 cycles of 7 years is the 50th year. Again, is a special year when all the land goes back to its original owners. The next mitzvah that only seemingly is a debate amongst the rabbis of whether or not it was kept in the desert is the mitzvah of tefillin, because we know tefillin has four. They're inside the boxes of tefillin. There are four parshias, four passages of the Torah that are inside the tefillin. In the head tefillin, it's 4 compartments. In the hand tefillin, it's all in 1 compartment. But the last 2 passages of tefillin were actually said by Moses in the book of Deuteronomy, right, which he said right before his passing, which is right before the Jewish people enter into the land of Israel. So how could they have put on tefillin if they didn't have all the parshas yet, all the passages? Others say that the Medrash brings that the Jewish people did put on tefillin because the first 2 passages were given at the Exodus. So if they were given at the Exodus and they were given the mitzvah tefillin, obviously they must have been given the mitzvah tefillin then. And this is also evidence, like you said, this is also mentioned in the Medrash, that there was a person who desecrated the Shabbos, and God mentions to Moses in this Medrash, this is from Eliyahu Rabbah, that the reason why this person violated Shabbos is because he did not wear tefillin on Shabbos, as is the law. So therefore, there was no special reminder of of his Judaism on that day. So God gave them the mitzvah of tzitzis. So we see that they must have worn tefillin. So obviously, how did that happen? If the last 2 passages weren't said yet, so obviously they were all said at the time of the Exodus, and it wasn't written down until the book of Deuteronomy, but the Jewish people already had them. Okay, so that's the mitzvah tefillin. So it seems like there's a debate, but it seems to be the consensus that tefillin was worn during the times of the desert, when the Jewish people were wandering in the desert. The next mitzvahs are the holidays. Jewish holidays, which are mentioned in last week's Torah portion, are obviously, they are specific. They have something that's specific to the land of Israel, which is the seasons that the holidays celebrate, right? There are 3 holidays. There's Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkot, and they are around specific times of the holidays. The first one, obviously, Pesach, is the month of spring, right? Then you have the harvest, right? That's the harvest holiday is Sukkot. You have the Sukkot is a harvest holiday, bringing into the bringing it into the house, right, by sukkahs, and all these different things represent different parts of the year of the different parts of the harvest in the land of Israel. And even more specific than that is the sukkah specifically celebrates the fact that the Jewish people were sheltered by God in the desert by the clouds of glory. So if the Jewish people had sukkahs, first of all, what would they be celebrating? They have the clouds of glory themselves. Why do they need remembrance? Right? The Torah tells us, "L'man yedu d'arosechem," that the generation should know, "Ki basu kos hoshafti," that I kept the Jewish people in the sukkahs. I protected the Jewish people. So why do you need to remember it when you're in it at that moment? Number one, and secondly, the clouds of glory would be like you can't put a sukkah under a tree. The clouds of glory would have been the same way, that the clouds of glory are protecting the Jewish people. You can't put a sukkah inside another sukkah, just like you can't put a sukkah under a tree or inside another sukkah. You can't put one sukkah in another sukkah. So the Jewish people would not be able to do the sukkah. So then the only way the Jewish people would have to do the mitzvah of sukkahs would be to leave the clouds of glory, to remember the clouds of glory, which obviously does not make sense. So they definitely do not do the holidays the way we do it now. Specifically as well, there is the mitzvah of Pesach, of the Karim Pesach, that we know the Jewish people only did one time in the desert. They did not do for the remaining 38 years, because obviously they have the original Pesach, right? That's year one, that basically. Then you have the next year, and then 38 years, there's no more Pesach until the Jewish people come into the land of Israel. And the reason they did that was because they didn't do the mitzvah of circumcision. Since after the second Pesach, there was no mitzvah of circumcision done. And obviously, the Torah tells us that somebody who is not circumcised is not allowed to do the Karim Pesach. So the Jewish people were not majority circumcised at that point. They didn't do that. So why didn't they do the mitzvah of circumcision? Because it says in the book of Joshua, and Joshua made them get circumcised when they came back, and it was simply because it was dangerous, because they were constantly in a state of traveling and of the dangerous conditions in the desert. It was not safe for the Jewish people to do that. So we see that it was impossible for them to do the Karim Pesach, to do circumcision, and therefore it was impossible for them to do the Karim Pesach. So we see that the Jewish people did not keep the mitzvahs in the fullest manner until they came into the land of Israel. Now, specifically, these two mitzvahs, however, we see of Karim Pesach and Bris Milah, of circumcision, are more general mitzvahs. They also include the punishment of kares, of being cut off from God, so to speak. That is the punishment for these mitzvahs, for not keeping these mitzvahs. So, meaning they have a cut off, meaning they're cut you off from God in a way, so to speak. So that means that they're more general mitzvahs. They're really important mitzvahs. At the same time, the Jewish people didn't do them. So we see that there's really a big connection between the mitzvahs and the land of Israel. That the Jewish people didn't really fully start keeping all the mitzvahs in their fullest extent until they got to the land of Israel. And we see that from these two general, crucial, I guess is probably the best way of saying it, mitzvahs they didn't do. Furthermore, we see that when the Jewish people left the land of Israel, when they were exiled from the land of Israel, they didn't keep all the mitzvahs as well. Until today, there are only, I think, obviously all the negative mitzvahs apply. I think it was, we said, 97 or something like that, mitzvahs that only apply outside the land of Israel. And many of those are only a remembrance for the mitzvahs that we do in the land of Israel. In fact, our sages tell us that the reason why we do the mitzvahs outside the land of Israel is it's like a sign. It's in order to have a way to come back. This is in the book of Jeremiah, right? Jeremiah tells Jewish people that when you go back to Babylon, you should put signs so you know the way back. What he was saying is that the mitzvahs are the signs to the way back. So keep the mitzvahs now, so you'll be able to keep them. You'll remember how to keep the mitzvahs when you come back to the land of Israel. So Jeremiah was saying that he was telling the Jewish people that they're going to come back to the land of Israel in the Second Temple era. As well, that when it comes to the Nachmanides explains even further that the Jewish people were told not just to keep the mitzvahs as a sign, but they should keep the mitzvahs even though they are not going to be able to keep them in the fullest extent, right? That They obviously, if you eat the matzah, they're not going to eat the matzah with the Karban Pesach, for example, right? They're not going to eat the matzah with the Pesach sacrifice. They're not going to be able to do the mitzvahs in the fullest way without the temple. So let's go. We see that in the time of the desert, they didn't keep the mitzvahs. So maybe in our current exile, we don't have to keep the mitzvahs in their fullest extent either. But if we really look into it, is that these signs are not just signs like we should remember that we're Jewish and that we have to do mitzvahs and we get back to the land of Israel, that they're going to keep us, that's when we're going to remember what to do. On the contrary, that the signs is something that is going to lead us back there, right? In other words, that the mitzvahs themselves is the way to get back, right? It's not just that we're going to remember and that's what we're going to do when we get there, right? So, in other words, the mitzvahs that we do now are not like, we're doing it just so we remember. The mitzvahs have meaning now. The mitzvahs now are what connects us to God and what brings about the redemption. And there's a famous Hasidic song that really connects this idea. Once there were Hasidim who were traveling to their Rebbe, and they heard the Russian wagon driver singing a Russian folk song. So the Hasidim, they liked the message. They found a message in the song, and they decided to adopt it, and became till today a Hasidic song. So I'll say the Russian song. I'm not going to sing it, but the Russian song goes like this: Nezherishi chlapsi. My Russian is not so great. It means that don't worry, what's going to be with us. That basically, I'll just say it in English. That's the name of the song. Is called Nezherishi chlapsi. That don't worry, what's going to be with us. He said we're going to come soon to an inn, and there's going to be a vodka, right? So in other words, it's like a Russian folk traveling song. Like right now we're headed on the way. It's cold. We're not doing so well, but don't worry. We're on the way, and there's going to be vodka there. In other words, that the fact that there's going to be vodka there, in and of itself, gives us the warmth now that looking forward to something. So the Hasidim adopted this as a message and they're traveling to the Rebbe, that right now we're in the cold wagon and we're not in a spiritual state of warmth. But when we know that soon we're going to get to the inn, meaning we're going to get to our Rebbe, and the Rebbe is going to give us our teachings, and he's going to warm us up. So the Rebbe, in fact, said that this song is not just a song about the Rebbe, but it's a fact about our topic, about the coming of Mashiach. That we know that Mashiach is coming, right? That there's going to be a time when we're going to go back in the land of Israel, and we're going to have all the mitzvahs, and we're going to do it in the fullest extent that we can. But in that itself gives us the warmth now in the cold wagon to get there. And the Hasidim took it further, and they said it's not enough that we just know that when we get there, there's going to be vodka, right? But we're going to get there, there's going to be that spiritual warmth. When Mashiach comes, there's going to be the mitzvahs in the fullest extent. But even as we're on the way, we got to take small shots of vodka. That's what the wagon drivers used to do. So they would say, it's not just to know that there's going to be this ultimate, place where we're going. But as we're going on the way, those small doses, so to speak, is what's going to get us there. We're not advocating drinking here. That's not, obviously, it's just a metaphor. But what we're really saying is that the warmth that we're going to get when we get there, that's the ultimate. But even as we're on the way, those small doses along the way, that's what's going to get us there. So, in other words, the mitzvahs that we're due now, that's what's going to get us to the ultimate, right? So, even though that now, like we said, in the times of the desert, the Jewish people didn't do the mitzvahs in the full extent. And even before that, in the times of our forefathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, we know that they kept the mitzvahs, even though there was no Torah at the time. They kept the mitzvahs in a way that was specific to their times. That is what led to the next step. In other words, the Jewish people keeping the mitzvahs that they did in the desert, that's what brought them to the next step, to the land of Israel. And the mitzvahs the Jewish people kept in Babylon, that's what brought them to the second temple. And the mitzvahs that we do now, that's what's going to bring us to the ultimate coming of Mashiach, where we'll be able to do every single mitzvah in its fullest, which will be speedily in our days. Everyone have a good Shabbos. Have a great week. We'll see you next week.